Today we're going to look at paragraph 1.2 about the world, the development in the world economy, of the development of the world economy. And what I would like to show you is the following. We're going to look at which two types of colonialism we do distinguish, what decolonization is and when did it start, what the Cold War was, what a free market economy is and what the relation with free trade is, and what the difference is between a free market economy and a planned economy. First of all, the types of colonialism. We do distinguish two different kinds of colonialism. That means trade colonialism or industrial colonialism, and in this case it's all about goods. And on the other hand, we do have settler colonialism. And I would like to show you what the difference is. At first, we did have trade colonialism. That was during the ages that the VOC was active, and it means that natural resources, spices, were traded across the globe. Later on, during the Industrial Revolution, industrial colonialism emerged. And during this period of time, it was all about ores, gold, silver, mineable products, which did not exist in countries like the Netherlands, and which means that we needed those countries to be able to feed our economic growth during the Industrial Revolution. On the other hand, we do have settler colonialism, and that is when people want to live in a certain country. And that was what happened in the United States when people moved from Europe and from all over the globe to the United States to live there. And what happened was that the people who were living in that country had to move. So the original inhabitants had to move because of the colonial expansion from countries from Europe. That did not happen with trade and industrial colonialism. Yes, countries did have the power over the country, but they did not want to live there. They only want to have their industrial products or their natural resources. From the colonies, sources like cotton, spices, silver and sugar were transported to Europe, and we bought and sold it on. So that means that we gained a lot of money from that process. That is the reason why we did have the golden age in the 17th century in the Netherlands. In the United States, at a certain point in time, plantations were established, and these plantations were needed because the people, of course, wanted to grow certain kind of crops, of products that did not grow at locations where the colonists came from. And on these plantations, slaves were put to work. But these slaves were bought from tribal fights in Africa. So there were tribal fights in Africa between tribals there, and of course they got prisoners of war, and these prisoners of war were bought by the Western Indian Company, the WIC. So what you see is that another form of trade emerged from then on, and you see on the pictures Batavia, which was of course the Dutch capital in Indonesia, for trade, and on the bottom you see a ship which contains slaves which were transported from Africa to the United States. Later on we did have the trade colonialism, and the industrial colonialism was a result of that. During the 19th century, countries wanted to obtain all kinds of ores and minerals from their colonies, and that is what we nowadays call land grabbing, which means that we actually take out all the ores and all the minerals that are available in a certain country and use them for their own production. And that is what's happening now. China, for example, does do land grabbing in Africa because they do not want to mine their own ores anymore, because that is too expensive nowadays. Then this map is a map which shows you which products were bought and sold from Indonesia to other countries, and it's unfortunately in French, but I can explain to you what you see over there. I will give you an example from Europe. What happened was that we exported certain kind of minerals and metals which are rare in other countries, but we did import pepper, cannel, which is kaneel in Dutch, you don't know what it is in English, cardamom, coffee, sugar, tea, and exotic products, muscat. Well, another country like Indonesia exported the pepper, the muscat, and important clothes, gold, and ivory. So you see that there are different kinds of products that were bought and sold from and to countries. Well, at a certain point in time, they did not want the colonization anymore because the countries wanted to be free. And that is what's called decolonization. In fact, it means that European oppressors privatized or released the former colonies and they became independent. Like Indonesia from the Netherlands in 1949. It should have been in 1945, but okay, the Netherlands did not want it yet. And Suriname in 1975. Most of the countries were liberated after World War II, and most of the African countries before. And it was a result because a new world order emerged. Western and communist countries, especially the US and the Soviet Union, were diametrically opposed to each other because they had other ways of looking at how a market works. And of course there was a third group, and that existed out of the peripheral countries, the periphery. And this resulted into something different, and that was the Cold War. And during the Cold War, the USA and the Soviet Union were against each other. Of course, United States did not want that there were coming more, or there were emerging more communist countries, which were influenced, of course, by the Soviet Union. And on the other hand, the Soviet Union did not want those capitalist countries. So they threatened each other with nuclear war, but actually did not attack. And they tried to gain influence in the world economy. So that was what happening. There was a bipolar economy at that time. So two main groups. And the real war actually took place in Korea and Vietnam, because Korea, of course, there were people there who didn't want to work together with China and the Soviet Union, so they wanted to become communist. But the Americans did not want that, so they started to help the south of Korea, and the north, of course, eventually became communist and the south became capitalist. And the same happened in Vietnam. You had North and South in Vietnam. At the north, you saw that there was a communist party active, and in the south there was a capitalist party active. In the 1970s, the United States Army had to withdraw from the southern part of Vietnam, and the whole country became communist because, well, the war there did not make sense. Many people were killed, and the results were, of course, in favor for the Communist Party. Later on, of course, the Soviet Union disappeared. Many of the communist countries did not exist anymore during the beginning of the 1990s, and that means that the world trade changed. Free trade emerged, and this was all due to the price of the goods, due to the law of supply and demand. And you see that on the right. The law of supply and demand is a theory that explains the interaction between the sellers of a resource and the buyers of that same resource. And the results were free trade. Any country could specialize itself in the production of goods or services in which they are the best. And companies have to access foreign sale markets like in the European Union. And of course, between the European Union, there are no borders anymore. And there are no import taxes, no VAT. So that is a great way to create a market which helps each other, helps itself, I should say, to become better. And what's the difference between a free trade market and a planned economy? You can see that on this picture. On the left, you see the communism, and of course, this is a purely plant-based economy. The country itself decides what is going to be produced. That means that it's not what we want, but what they want. So, for example, if they want that everyone has a telephone, so that means that the Communist Party makes a plan for the upcoming 5 years, and within these 5 years, that amount of phones is going to be produced. North Korea is one of the most pure planned economies in the world, and if you go to the right, you see that economic systems get mixed up. like China, Venezuela, and these countries are communist, socialist, but they have a strong external market, which means that they are dependent on trade. And if you look at France, Sweden, the Netherlands, we are more or less in the middle of this process. And on the right, you see the United States, Japan, and the pure free market. The most pure free market in Europe is Switzerland. So this was what I would like to tell you today, what I wanted to tell you today. And you see that there are many processes which were important in the development of the trade system that we recognize nowadays. If you have any questions, please ask them, and I hope that I've given you enough knowledge that you can use to make the exercises with this paragraph.